The Citadel Prime's great council chamber buzzed with the soft murmurs of 100 different species. I adjusted my translator implant, still occasionally overwhelmed by the cacophony of alien voices despite my years studying emerging civilizations. My name is Lyra Valerius, junior historian of the Xylosian Archives, specializing in newly discovered sentient species. And today, everything was about to change. The human probe entered restricted Cthar space deliberately. Ambassador Forlag's voice boomed across the chamber. His leathery skin, typically a calm blue-gray, had darkened to a stormy indigo as he gestured with all four arms. They claim it was a warp drive test, but my military intelligence suggests reconnaissance intentions. I stifled a sigh. The Cthar Empire, while a cornerstone member of our galactic concord, had always been prone to military paranoia. But this time, their concerns had gained alarming traction. This latest incident, Forlag continued, mandibles clicking with agitation, merely confirms what many of us have suspected for the past 2 decades. Humans are dangerously unpredictable and technologically precocious beyond their social maturity. Around me, many delegates nodded in agreement. Earth had only been discovered 20 years ago, mere moments in galactic politics. The observation delegation had reported a species technologically advanced enough for interplanetary travel, but fragmented into competing nation-states with bewildering cultural contradictions. I remind the Council, I heard myself saying before I could stop, that humanity has had extremely limited contact with the Concord. Perhaps these mistakes reflect misunderstanding rather than malice. Forlag's upper eyes swiveled toward me. The historian speaks of misunderstandings. Was it a misunderstanding when their unauthorized mining operation collapsed the methane ecosystem on Ganymede? Was it a misunderstanding when they decoded our encrypted communications without permission? I felt Professor Eldrin, my mentor, gently touch my arm. Choose your battles wisely, Lyra, he whispered. His iridescent Xylosian skin reflected the Council's lights in a pattern suggesting caution. The Cthar ambassador speaks truth, chittered Delegate Marar ZTK of the Sorial Confederation. Humans expand rapidly, consume voraciously, and their intraspecies conflicts suggest fundamental instability. Containment seems prudent. I wanted to object, but found myself unable to formulate a compelling defense. The evidence was troubling. In just 2 decades of limited observation, humans had advanced their technology at rates that alarmed even our most progressive xenotechnologists. Their social structures remained bafflingly divided, with resources unevenly distributed despite apparent technical ability to provide for their entire species. And they had shown an unnerving talent for appropriating and improving upon technologies they barely understood. We have entertained this experiment long enough, Forlag declared. I formally propose a vote on the exile of Earth from Concord space and the establishment of a permanent isolation barrier around their solar system. The council chamber erupted in conversation. Exile was rare, imposed only 3 times in the Concord's 12,000-year history. It meant severing all contact, restricting travel, and essentially quarantining an entire civilization. This is unprecedented for a pre-Concord species, Professor Eldrin noted, his voice carrying the weight of his 2 centuries of historical expertise. We typically guide emerging civilizations, not abandon them. This species needs no guidance. They need boundaries, Forlag countered. Their development trajectory is unique and troubling. Left unchecked, they could destabilize an entire sector within a few centuries. The High Arbiter, a serpentine Chewolf with scales that shifted between translucent and opaque, raised her staff. The Council will deliberate and vote in one cycle. Let all evidence and testimony be presented before then. As the session adjourned, I hurried after Professor Eldrin, weaving through delegates of varying anatomies. We need to do something, I said, my inner membranes flushing with agitation. I've studied human history. They're chaotic, yes, but also remarkably adaptive and creative. Eldrin's eye stalks drooped slightly. Lyra, your fascination with Earth has always been evident. But even I must admit that recent developments are concerning. Their children, Professor. Brilliant, complicated children. Children with thermonuclear weapons and a newly tested warp drive, he countered gently. But I agree. We should at least attempt to understand the recent incident better. I've arranged access to the full incident report in the archives. We spent hours reviewing the data, but found little to counter Forlag's narrative. The human probe had indeed entered Kthar's space, though its trajectory suggested possible navigational error rather than espionage. But intent hardly mattered now. The political momentum was building against Earth. We should at least attempt contact with their representatives, I suggested. Give them an opportunity to explain. Eldrin hesitated, then nodded. I can request a direct communication channel, though I doubt it will change many minds now. When the Earth delegation's response finally came the next day, it was tersely enigmatic. The image showed 3 humans in formal attire, their facial expressions unreadable to most non-humans. Their spokesperson, a female with dark skin and silver-threaded hair, spoke just 7 words. We have heard. We understand. Nothing more. The message stunned both Eldrin and me. No defense. No explanation. No plea for reconsideration. What could this mean? I wondered aloud. Eldrin's skin pulsed with concerned colors. Either they don't comprehend the severity of their situation, or they don't care. I finished disbelieving. The vote proceeded as scheduled. I spent the interim desperately searching for precedents, for legal arguments, for anything that might sway the council. I found troubling patterns. The Concord had historically treated rapidly developing species with suspicion, often attempting to slow their progress through various interventions. Several earlier Exile cases showed similar justifications, though none involve a species with humanity's particular combination of traits. When the council reconvened, the chamber felt heavier, more solemn. Before we proceed to the vote, the High Arbiter announced, Earth's response to our communication has been distributed to all delegates. That cryptic 7-word statement caused more concern than reassurance. In the silence that followed, I made one final attempt. Honored delegates. I began, my voice steady despite my inner turmoil. I speak not as an advocate for Earth, but as a historian. Throughout our Concord's history, our greatest advancements have come through engagement, not isolation. The humans are unusual, yes, their development unpredictable, but Exile will only ensure that unpredictability continues without our influence or understanding. Forlags responsiva swift. The historian speaks of understanding. Let me present what we understand. A species with unrestrained population growth, unsustainable resource consumption, internal warfare using increasingly sophisticated weapons, and now, apparent disregard for Concord boundaries and protocols. What more must we understand before acting prudently? The vote was swift and decisive. Earth would be exiled. The terms gave humanity one standard cycle, approximately 1 Earth year, to withdraw any off-world assets and prepare for complete isolation. A barrier of automated monitoring stations would enforce the quarantine, with any attempt to breach it considered a hostile act. I left the chamber feeling hollow. Professor Eldrin placed a comforting appendage on my shoulder. History takes unexpected turns, Lyra. This isn't necessarily the end of humanity's story, merely the end of its current chapter with the Concord. I nodded absently, already wondering what humanity's response would be to this cosmic rejection. No one expected what actually happened. The first month after the vote passed without incident. The monitoring stations reported normal activity within the Sol system. Spacecraft moving between planets, typical energy signatures from Earth and its colonies, standard communications traffic. In the second month, unusual energy patterns began appearing intermittently. The monitoring stations recorded brief subspace fluctuations, too subtle and fleeting for immediate concern, but unusual enough that I began collecting the data, sensing something significant. These energy signatures, I explained to Professor Eldrin in our research chamber, they're unlike typical human technology, but they're definitely originating from Earth and several of their colonies. Eldrin examined my findings. Interesting, almost as if they're experimenting with something new. something that interacts with subspace. But the fluctuations are so brief and contained, I noted. Whatever they're doing, they're being careful not to broadcast it. By the fourth month, a pattern had emerged. The subspace fluctuations had increased in frequency, but decreased in duration. Meanwhile, conventional activity within the Sol system, spacecraft movements, communications, energy outputs from cities, remained unchanged. I brought my findings to the Concord Monitoring Committee, but received little interest. As long as they remain within their system and prepare for isolation, their internal activities are no longer our concern, the chairperson informed me. In the fifth month, something changed. The intermittent subspace signatures suddenly organized into a complex pattern, pulsing with mathematical precision for exactly 12 hours, then ceasing completely. It's as if they were testing something, I told Eldrin. Calibrating it. Signaling, he suggested, his skin displaying concerned wavelengths. The sixth month brought the inexplicable. Over a period of just 3 days, all human activity in the Sol system began to diminish. First, their communications networks went silent. Then, energy readings from cities and installations flickered and faded. Spacecraft stopped moving. And finally, all biosigns, the collective life energy signature of billions of humans, simply vanished. The monitoring committee called an emergency session. Could this be some form of mass extinction event? A pandemic? Nuclear warfare? Asked one delegate. Impossible, replied the chief xenobiologist. Such events would leave detectable radiation, biological markers, or debris. We detect nothing, just absence. Forlag, attending as an observer, scoffed. Obviously a technological malfunction in our monitoring system. Across all stations simultaneously? I challenged. Highly improbable. The Concord dispatched scout vessels to investigate. The Exile terms hadn't technically begun, and this situation warranted direct observation. What they found defied explanation. Earth stood silent. Cities intact, but empty. Oceans still but devoid of larger life forms. Orbital installations abandoned. Mars colony silent. Jupiter mining platforms deserted. The entire human civilization, billions of individuals, their spacecraft, their larger animals, significant portions of their technology, and strangely, most of their stored data, had simply vanished. No signs of violence. No indications of hasty evacuation. No debris fields suggesting mass exodus by conventional spacecraft. It was as if humanity had collectively decided to disappear. They didn't wait to be asked twice, Professor Eldrin remarked as we reviewed the reconnaissance footage. They exiled themselves before we could exile them. The mystery captured the Concord's attention briefly, but as the isolation barrier was formally established at the one-cycle deadline, interest gradually waned. Without new data, the disappearance of humanity became a historical curiosity, a strange footnote in galactic records. Many species projected their own interpretations. The Cathar suggested mass suicide rather than face humiliation. The Chuolth proposed a collective migration to a prepared hidden colony. The Sorial Confederation actually developed a religious interpretation involving ascension to another plane of existence. I remained obsessed. I published papers analyzing the subspace fluctuations and proposing various theories, earning a reputation as an eccentric but respected specialist in the human question. Professor Eldrin supported my work until his passing 15 years later, his final message to me simply stating, "The greatest mysteries are worthy of lifetimes, Lyra." And so 50 years passed. I advanced to senior historian, then principal archivist of emerging civilizations. The Exile of Earth became a case study in my field, though few shared my continued fascination with the vanished humans. The first rumors came from the galactic fringe, outside Concord space, reports of unidentified vessels with unusual technology, isolated encounters with beings that resembled descriptions of humans, but somehow different, more uniform in appearance, moving with unsettling precision, possessing technology that defied conventional analysis. Most dismissed these as spacer tales or cases of mistaken identification. Until Outpost Terminus 9, a Concorde scientific installation in the Outer Rim, went silent. The investigation team found the outpost completely destroyed. Not damaged, atomized. Energy weapon signatures, unlike anything in Concorde records, had reduced a facility housing 3,000 researchers to elementary particles. The few recovered fragments showed molecular disassembly consistent with hypothetical but never-before-seen technology. More incidents followed. 3 trading vessels disappeared in the Cygnus expanse. A mining colony on Viridian suffered an unexplained catastrophic atmospheric processor failure. A Cathar patrol fleet went missing near the Perseus Gap. The Concorde Council, initially reluctant to connect these events, finally acknowledged the pattern when direct evidence emerged. A damaged surveillance drone returned from the Perseus Gap, carrying fragmentary visual data of the attackers. The beings were unmistakably human in basic form. Bipedal, familiar facial structure, but with significant differences. Their skin had an artificial uniformity, with circuitry-like patterns faintly visible beneath. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated, and their technology bore no resemblance to the relatively primitive spacecraft humans had possessed 50 years earlier. "It can't be them," insisted Forlag's successor, Ambassador Krell, before the Council. "Humans lack the capacity to survive interstellar travel en masse, let alone develop such technologies." "With respect, Ambassador," I countered, having been summoned as the foremost human expert, "we never truly understood their capacity. What these images show matches exactly what I've theorized for decades. Humanity didn't just evacuate their system. They evolved." "Evolved? In 50 years," scoffed a Sorial delegate. "Transformed then," I clarified. "Those subspace fluctuations we detected before their disappearance. I believe they were testing a technology that allowed them to accelerate their development in isolation, perhaps in a subspace pocket with different temporal properties." The council chamber erupted in skeptical murmurs. "This is speculative nonsense," Krell dismissed. "More likely we face a new, unknown species that coincidentally resembles humans." Before the debate could continue, the chamber's communication system overrode itself, something that should have been technically impossible given the Citadel's security protocols. A figure appeared on all displays, clearly human in origin, but altered. Silvery circuitry patterns traced across skin that seemed to shift between organic and synthetic. Eyes too luminous, movements too fluid. "Greetings, Galactic Concorde." The figure spoke, its voice resonating with harmonics that triggered emotional responses across species. "After 50 years, we have returned to open diplomatic relations." The council froze. Security protocols activated but failed to terminate the transmission. "Who addresses the Concorde?" the High Arbiter finally demanded. The figure smiled, an expression I recognized from my studies as indicating satisfaction, though it contained an unsettling perfection. "I am Admiral Serafina Chun, representative of the United Terran Sovereignty. You once knew us as humanity. You once voted to exile us." Stunned silence filled the chamber. "Impossible," Krell finally sputtered. "Humans couldn't have developed this level of technology." Chun finished. "Survived interstellar distances? Evolved beyond your expectations? Your limited imagination was precisely why we chose to accelerate our development independently." I stood, drawn forward by decades of curiosity. "The subspace fluctuations before your disappearance." Chen's gaze turned to me, and I felt a strange sense of being truly seen. "Historian Valerius, your papers on our disappearance were remarkably insightful, if incomplete. Yes, we developed temporal acceleration technology. What you experienced as 50 years, we experienced as nearly 5 centuries of accelerated evolution and development." The implications stunned the council into silence. "The recent incidents," began the High Arbiter, "regrettable but necessary demonstrations," Chun stated without remorse. "After analyzing your historical treatment of emergent civilizations, we determined that the Concorde respects only strength. We provided evidence of ours. This is an act of war, Krell declared. Chen's expression remained unchanged. No, Ambassador. It is an introduction. A true introduction, not the limited observation you permitted before judgment. We have no interest in war. It would be both destructive and unnecessary given our technological disparity. The silence that followed was deafening. What do you want? Asked the High Arbiter finally. Recognition, respect, and a new relationship. Not as a member subordinate to your Concord, but as an independent sovereign power with whom you will negotiate as equals. Chen's image shifted slightly, displaying subtle augmentations that hadn't been visible before. We've established territories and regions you've never explored. We've developed technologies you've never conceived. And we've evolved beyond the chaotic, divided species you once dismissed. And the attacks? Demanded a council member. Calibrated responses to incursions into our space you never charted or claimed. We left markers. They were ignored. Chen's tone remained even, factual. We could have responded with far greater force. I felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread. The humans I had studied and defended had indeed been remarkable, but they had become something else entirely, something that even I struggled to comprehend. We will send a formal delegation to Citadel Prime in 3 standard days, Chen continued. We expect appropriate accommodation and diplomatic recognition. Our delegation will present terms for peaceful coexistence and potential cooperation. The transmission ended as abruptly as it had begun. The council exploded into panic, arguments, and desperate calls for military preparation. I stood silently, processing the implications of what we had just witnessed. You were right, Lyra, said a voice beside me. A younger Xylosian counselor, one who had read my work, though perhaps not in the way you hoped. No, I admitted. I argued for understanding and cooperation with a developing species. I never imagined that our rejection would forge them into something beyond our comprehension. I nodded slowly. The Concord's mistake wasn't just moral, it was strategic. We created our own nemesis. The delegation arrived exactly as promised. Their vessel defied conventional physics, appearing suddenly at Citadel Prime without triggering any of the usual space-time distortions associated with faster-than-light travel. It resembled no spacecraft design I had ever studied. Organic curves blended with crystalline structures that seemed to shift and reconfigure even as we observed them. The Council, having spent 3 days in emergency sessions, had prepared a cautious diplomatic reception, along with concealed defensive measures that I suspected the humans could detect easily. Admiral Chun led the delegation personally. In physical presence, the alterations to human form were more evident. Subtle biomechanical enhancements, eyes with visible processing capabilities, skin with adaptive properties. They moved with an unsettling synchronization that suggested some form of shared consciousness. Historian Valerius, Chen acknowledged me directly during the initial reception. Your work preserved much of our original history. We would be pleased if you would participate in these negotiations as a cultural interpreter. I found myself drawn into the most extraordinary diplomatic process in Concord history. Over the following weeks, the humans, or what they had become, presented terms that fundamentally restructured galactic politics. They didn't request membership in the Concord. They established themselves as an independent power with territories in regions the Concord had never explored. They offered technological exchanges, carefully limited to non-military applications, that nevertheless exceeded current Concord capabilities by centuries. Most disturbingly, they revealed detailed knowledge of internal Concord politics and secret deliberations from the past 50 years, including classified discussions about potentially neutralizing Earth before the Exile vote. They had been watching us, studying us, even as we believed them vanished. Ow! I asked Shin privately, after a particularly tense negotiation session. Quantum observation networks, she replied matter-of-factly. We developed the capacity to monitor space-time fluctuations across vast distances. Your civilization is noisy, quantum mechanically speaking, and the attacks on Concord outposts. Chin's expression remained neutral, calibrated responses to specific threats. The Kthar fleet was preparing to map routes to our space. The mining colony had discovered one of our subspace anchors. Terminus 9 was developing weapons specifically designed to target our technology. You could have communicated, I suggested. Based on the Concorde's previous treatment, our analysis suggested demonstrations of capability would be more effective than words. She paused, studying me. You believed in us once, historian, before we believed in ourselves. I believed in understanding, not dominance, I countered. Understanding requires equality first, Chin responded. The Concorde never viewed us as equals. The negotiations concluded with what the Concorde publicly called a mutual recognition agreement, but was effectively a surrender to a new galactic reality. The United Terran sovereignty was acknowledged as a separate power with its own sphere of influence. Technology exchanges would begin under strictly controlled conditions. Several disputed regions would be jointly administered. The day the treaty was formalized, I found myself alone in the great observatory of Citadel Prime, contemplating how drastically the galaxy had changed in my lifetime. Your disappointment is evident, historian, came Chin's voice as she entered silently. Not disappointment, I clarified. Concern. You become something remarkable, but I wonder at what cost to your humanity. We're still human, she replied, just operating on a different level of existence. We've unified our consciousness while maintaining individual identity. We've transcended biological limitations while preserving our emotional core. And yet you returned with demonstrations of force, with demands rather than invitations. Chin was silent for a moment, gazing at the galactic display. We debated this extensively. Some advocated for gentler approaches, others for much more aggressive demonstrations. Her voice softened slightly. In 5 centuries of accelerated development, we've explored countless philosophical paths, historian. We've created art forms you cannot perceive, music that would overwhelm your neural systems, sciences that would seem like magic. But not patience, I observed. Not forgiveness. Those we cultivated as well, she countered. Consider that we could have returned with immediate military dominance. Instead, we chose limited demonstrations followed by negotiation. She turned to me. The Exile vote taught us something crucial. The galaxy respects power before principles. We adapted accordingly. I considered this. And now, what does humanity want beyond recognition? For the first time, I saw something like wistfulness cross her enhanced features. To explore, to create, to understand the universe at levels previously unattainable, and perhaps, eventually, to find others like ourselves. Others. We've detected signals from beyond the galactic rim, signs of intelligences operating at similar or greater advancement than our own. She smiled faintly. The Concorde isn't the height of evolution, historian. It's merely an adolescent phase of development. We've moved beyond it. And drag us with you, whether we were ready or not. I noted. Yes. No apology in her tone. Because greater challenges are coming that will require all sentient life to evolve or perish. Our return isn't just about settling old grievances. It's about preparing this galaxy for what lies beyond. She left me with that cryptic warning, one that I would spend my remaining years attempting to unravel. In my final historical work, completed as I approached the end of my natural lifespan, I wrote, "The exile of Earth must now be recognized as the most consequential miscalculation in Concorde history. In our fear of humanity's potential chaos, we catalyzed their transformation into something far beyond our understanding. Whether this transformation ultimately benefits the wider galaxy remains to be seen. What is clear is that humanity didn't simply wait to be exiled. They seized upon rejection as an opportunity for reinvention. They didn't wait to be asked twice to leave. They departed on their own terms, only to return as something we barely recognize. Perhaps there is a lesson here about the unintended consequences of fear-based decisions, or about the remarkable adaptability of life when faced with existential challenges. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler. In a universe of endless possibilities, never assume you've seen the final form of any intelligence. The humans have returned, and the galaxy will never be the same. As for what came after, the technological renaissance, sparked by controlled human knowledge transfers, the discovery of the extragalactic entities Chun had referenced, and the eventual formation of a new interstellar order. Those events would be chronicled by historians of a later age. My role was to document the transition, the moment when humanity refused exile and instead chose to transform themselves into something the galaxy could no longer ignore or dismiss. They didn't wait to be asked twice. They simply became something that could no longer be asked at all.